Hello, and welcome to episode 72 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Alan Neuhauser, reporter at U.S. News & World Report. How are you doing today, Alan?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. The first question I'd like to ask you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Oh boy, that's a big question. To advance the public interest, I suppose working as a journalist is the big one. I suspect why you're here. It is, it's a job like anything else. But when things go well and you have those days that you feel really good about it, it's a job where the ultimate mission is to hold people accountable and hold those in power accountable, and that is the public service I hope most to accomplish in this role.
Why is it important to hold people in power accountable, and how does writing do that?
Writing can give, and writing in the capacity that we have online, in addition to video and photos and everything else we're able to do, can give a voice to the voiceless, people who don't have a lot of power. We can be one of the few recourses that they have, and one that maybe they can get access to for not a lot of money. You know, if you're someone who's facing hard times and being exploited in some way, a legal team can be expensive. And it's not to say that we at all do the same function or even have the same level of power, but often we can at least get a conversation started on a topic and help others out. But also it's broader than that too, even if it's more of a policy question, something like Donald Trump's tax returns. It can try to keep people, make sure people are being honest and treating others fairly. And that we know as much about those in power as we're able to and as we want to.
How does the press apply pressure to elected officials to try to cajole them into performing a certain action? Where does that power come from?
A lot of it, and it's an interesting question because that's changing with social media and digital media. A lot of it used to be that we were the microphone to get to the public and the public's voice back to these elected officials. We used to be the main channel for that. That is now changing. As we've seen with folks like Donald Trump, they're able to just go on social media and sometimes go around us or go through websites that might not be the most reputable or aren't exactly news sites, even though they might claim to be. One thing that we can still do is, I think, have the power of shame. Sometimes that quality can be hit and miss depending on who it is you're focusing on, but to at least shame people if they're doing something wrong, to make it public, and if people find whatever conduct is going on objectionable, to, if they're public attorneys, to launch investigations, if they're politicians, to also perhaps launch investigations or call more attention to it, or if they're the public, to find other ways to take action. So,
are the issues that you write about and that U.S. News & World Report covers limited to political issues? Because we've been speaking about journalism holding elected power or any power accountable. Are there other sorts of issues and powers that you're holding accountable here?
Whether we are or not is a question. We try to. And I don't think it's ever just us. I think it's often, can it be one story or one person? Sure, but just as often, if not more so, it's the pressure that follows from a collective effort of folks who, what you see one story and that leads to another story and that leads to another story. So it's not just one reporter or publication. I don't want to be taking credit for.
Sure. Is there conscious coordination among multiple press outlets?
No, absolutely not. There's competition. There's intense competition. But if you, for example, look at what the reporter over at the Washington Post was doing with regard to Donald Trump's donations, that was him putting pressure on. But other stories, because it's a newsworthy story, other reporters see that and go, this is important. And maybe we have a way to report on this too that's a little different than what he's doing, but still goes to this mission of holding people in power accountable. As far as people who are not elected, whether we're also trying to keep them accountable, sure, I can think of a few examples. One is, for example, the NFL and Commissioner Roger Goodell. One of the stories that has been something that I've been passionate about and following is the issue of concussions, and specifically concussions in sports and concussions in youth sports that become feeders to the professional leagues. And writing about what do these league organizers, what do the professional leagues know and don't know, and what should parents know, and trying to inform that conversation as well.
So you're pressuring Power, being the commissioner of the National Football League, to try to get him to do something to improve the safety and welfare and health of young athletes seeking to do well in football.
Yeah, and it's tough because it's an interesting question, right, of what we're trying to do. You know, you can't necessarily go in and say, you know, we want to do X goal, because that then skews your story, and often then it becomes editorializing, or you're taking sort of objective facts and trying to sort of crowbar them into a narrative or shape them into the narrative you already have going on. It's more, excuse me, it's more, what do we know? What do they know about this? What should parents know? For example, a study came out recently about the correlation between NFL players and retired NFL players who have long-term chronic brain injury, and which of them played football before a young age. And there was a correlation that if you started playing football at a younger age, you were more likely to have, if I remember correctly, this chronic degenerative brain disease. And so it's that prompts a few questions. Okay, we have this study. What are the high school leagues doing about it? What are the youth leagues doing about it? Are they changing their guidelines for tackle football? What do parents feel about this? So it's not necessarily going in and saying we feel there need to be these changes. It's more exploring the questions prompted, and the tough questions prompted by things like that.
So in terms of applying pressure, I'm thinking, well, to what extent does a particular reporter or even a news organization, such as your employer, apply the pressure directly to a commissioner in this case? Or to what extent do you get the conversation on particular topics started such that your readership, the public, is the source of the pressure on the commissioner?
You write about it, I guess. Do videos about it if you have a video unit. You write about the story, and that's assuming that, you know, and who's to say whether pressure also is what your end goal is. Sometimes it's just to inform a conversation and to maybe add layers of complexity or nuance to it, or to update commonly held beliefs. You do, I think, and that's where I think the limits of the press's power are too, and I think we're really seeing that now is you can write about issues or people changing their positions or corruption, but it ultimately comes down on the public to care about that. And so we have a job to report it as well as we can, find as many facts as we can, and write it and present it as well as we can.
And if the public ignores it, doesn't take action on it, then you get something like Trump not releasing his tax returns. The public does take action on it. You get something maybe in South Korea where the public is demanding that the prime minister, president step down, and then she is now following that path. So it's you start the conversation, and if other media outlets pick up on that and it gains momentum and the public starts taking action, then you may actually have something there.
Yeah, I mean, our power comes from how much the public cares and follows these issues, and ultimately feels that there's a need for action or not.
So many news organizations, I feel, are challenged by a dual desire to report the news and invest in investigative journalism versus appeal to the public and almost provide entertainment value. How do you get the public to care versus how do you give them what they ought to know? How does that balance affect your life?
You know, sometimes those things are separate and sometimes they go together. Like anywhere else, especially now that we're online, there is a demand to produce daily content, and it's an appropriate demand. You know, I like reading fun and entertaining stories as much as the next person, so it can be something simple, like a quick hit, that our social media folks will do on something that's kind of fun. It could be the fact that a quick story on Cory Booker sending a letter calling for an investigation into the recent rash of hate crimes. That would be a quick daily story, or it could be a longer term effort. And to your question of how you get people to care about some of those deeper dives, sometimes it's a bigger challenge than others. Writing about taxes can sometimes be a bigger challenge than, crime, which is often more visceral for readers, or other issues.
And
but
when you mentioned taxes just now,
Yeah.
sorry to interject, but it seems like on the surface that is a very dry, boring topic.
Right.
But on the other hand, that's the reason why the people have control over Congress to some extent, is because Congress has the power of the purse. They have taken our money, and people feel very protective about their money. In fact, traditionally, many Americans in the later 20th century and early 21st century are attracted to the Republican Party,
Right.
primarily as a tax-based issue. So people feel very passionate, government hands off. This is my money, my wallet, and you're taking it, and you better spend it well. So how do you kind of reconcile the idea that, one, tax policy is complicated and dry and boring,
Right.
but on the other hand, people are very emotional about how much money the government is taking from them?
I think you just got to exactly how you do it. It's you make it personal. You look at some of the best stories that are out there, or take a look at the front page of the New York Times. They will have stories that are policy stories. They're about federal policy, and there's a way to do it that's super dry, where you just talk about the story, the policy. More often than not, it seems, at least for these stories that make it to A1, it is they find people who are affected by it. So if you're writing something about tax policy and a change to the tax code, you find the small businesses or whatever who will feel that, and you put their face on it. Because at the end of the day, the best stories are about people, and really that's what stories at the end of the day are about, people and how they'll be affected.
So the hook is getting the reader to identify with the subject matter in a personal way.
Yeah, and see that it's not merely abstract, that these are real things we're talking about with real implications, with real effects on people.
And it could happen to me.
Maybe not, or someone or just people out there, that it's not some abstraction.
It's not an academic exercise, but it has real effects on real people.
Right, and that is sometimes finding those, that's goes back to one of the core jobs of being a reporter, is finding those people who are going to be affected by this.
So I'd like to bring the conversation a little bit back to Alan Neuhauser. Why is it that you're here? How did you end up here? How did you choose to be a journalist? Why? And did you see it as a means of advancing the public interest? What is it that attracted you to this career field?
Coming out of college, I wasn't sure what I really wanted to do, like so many people. I'd always loved journalism. As a kid, I didn't really watch cartoons. I watched the news for whatever reason, which I learned is actually not that uncommon. I think a lot of kids do that. The idea of being able to be anyone, and with the right journalistic training and the right support, you could meet all sorts of interesting people, hear stories from all walks of life that you would never meet before, but also every once in a while get the opportunity to use the trust of the public to try to hold people in power accountable. I thought that's always been something I found really important.
So So again, we're holding people accountable. Oh, let's talk. So did you work on the concussion story?
I did. I've written about it as far as boxing, youth boxing, and football also.
Okay, so you've gotten a wide range. You've spoken about political issues and sports issues. And so, how is it that you first came to the idea? Obviously, as a child watching the news, you weren't thinking about holding power accountable. When did that evolve? How did that your desire to hold power accountable evolve within you?
I don't know. It's funny. Sitting here, I've been actually trying to think about where that came from. I'm honestly not sure. I know my parents, it's a very strongly held belief for them. It's interesting. My mom's an attorney. My dad's a plumbing contractor, so they're not in public service themselves.
Yeah.
It's something that they follow very closely. And I think just talking with them around the dinner table and spending time with them, and then I think that's probably what seeded that feeling early on. I just know that seeing corruption, seeing people abuse their power, especially when it's exploiting people without any power. It infuriates me. It's galling,
and so holding them, and as opposed to, for instance, leaving college, wondering what you're going to do, going into trying to become the person in power, you sought more to hold that person accountable. Did you ever consider going into a path where you are holding the power?
No. I have no interest, really.
Okay, so what is it that's special about U.S. News and World Report?
It's been interesting, actually. So coming here, U.S. News has this great historical reputation. I didn't really know what to expect. I knew I was really looking forward to it. I was very excited for the opportunity beforehand. I was at a really wonderful publication in New York City called DNA Info that kicks ass, honestly, as far as local New York City news. But I got this opportunity down here in D.C., first to cover energy and the environment. And it appealed to me to try something new. I'd always loved the idea of magazine-style journalism. And
why is that?
I like the idea of, it's every reporter, or not every reporter's, but often a common journalistic dream to be able to take time with a story and dive deep and talk to a lot of people and maybe have a little bit more stylistic control instead of a straight, hard news story.
And that's because a daily newspaper needs a news story every day versus a magazine will come out less frequently, so you'll have more time to develop the story. Is that right?
Exactly. And you still often have that demand, especially with online now, to do daily. But here we have wonderful support to take time with stories, to dive deep, to really get to know them. It's a crack team of editors here, a really supportive newsroom, and so all those things combined are what appealed to me and have really motivated me since coming here. So
you speak about the editors in the newsroom. How does that influence the story? What role, talk about the process and about why it matters to have a good support staff and a team of editors.
Well, it's like anything else. Everybody needs, when they're writing, a good editor. It doesn't matter what job you have. If it involves writing, you're going to need revisions. And another set of eyes. The process here is, most newspapers, I think, or news outlets, the thinking is you have a beat. Right now, mine currently is criminal justice and law enforcement, and therefore it's you more likely than not will be the person who knows your beat the best. And so I will bring stories to the editors. Most mornings I'll say, hey, this is what I'm looking at. This is what I'm hearing. I had a conversation the other day. This is what I hear. But they'll sometimes bring stuff to me, too. They've heard something or they see something as sort of bubbling up. And we'll talk about it or exchange some emails and then move forward from there.
And then you draft the article. And how does it feel to see your articles published?
It's anxiety provoking.
Interesting.
Is there a sense of pride with the really good stories that I've worked hard on? Sure, but mostly I'm pretty sure, we went through fact checking, we went through editing. I'm confident this is right, but once it goes up, oh man, I hope I there's still that voice in the back of your head, that fear that you dotted all your I's and crossed all your T's. And
it must feel nice, though, to see your name in print around a national publication.
Yeah, I know it makes my parents very happy. I try not. It's just a matter of working hard. Is it something I'm proud of? Am I proud of this publication? Yeah, but my name, it doesn't. That's not the motivation for me.
So motivation is really holding power accountable. And so do you do any, so I'm interested just in, you spoke about social media, and if we could circle back to that for a minute. That seems to be a very new Well, it's been around since the early 21st century, but it's having an increasing impact in how journalism works, how power is held accountable, how power reaches out. How have you seen, although you've only been in journalism for about 10 years or so, how have you seen social media changing the landscape and how power is held accountable?
Let me see. Well, I've only been in this role for, I graduated in 2009 from undergrad. So I've been in this for about 6 years if we're going to include grad school. 7 years. Now coming up on 7 years. Social media has definitely become far more prominent, it seems like. I do use Twitter and Facebook and other forms of media to engage with audiences, to see what the conversation is, to see what stories are out there.
Interesting. So it's something that you use as a tool, as a journalist. It's not just something that Trump is going over your head and reaching directly to the audience, but you're using it too to get your message out there or to find out what the message ought to be.
Yeah, and not even so much what the message ought to be, but either if it's a story we've worked on that we're reporting, you can put it out there, and hopefully if readers comment on it or engage with it, you can sort of continue that conversation. That's something that I actually really enjoy, at least when the conversation from readers is civil. But also you could see what other reporters are working on, what people in your field have noticed, whether it's professors or advocates or politicians. You can see what they're talking about and what's important to them, and that can lead to more stories too.
Interesting. So you're creating a sort of online community with your readership where there's a back and forth dialogue that informs future stories that you may be working on.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know how much we're creating that community. I think it's one of these things.
But you're a part of it.
We're a part of it. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're nearing the end of our podcast, and as we do so, I'd like to ask you one final question, which is to reflect upon your years in journalism, 7 years, if that's the case, and what you've inherited in journalism, what you seek to leave behind as a legacy eventually towards the end of your career for the next generation of journalists, or what you hope young journalists may be thinking of. What is the legacy that you hope to leave behind? How are you advancing the public interest? Why have you chosen this path? I know we've covered some of this already, but I guess if you could just sum up kind of your general motivations and what you hope will be the effects. Have you held power accountable? And as journalism evolves, what do you hope to see in journalism?
I think the most important thing that I would say I inherited, excuse me, is the reporting fundamentals. When I was in grad school, I had this really phenomenal, legendary professor there, a guy named Sandy Padway. And
at what school?
At the Columbia School of Journalism.
Okay.
And he really instilled in us the level of responsibility that we have, the power that we have to do good, but also the harm it can have when it goes wrong, when we don't uphold the fundamentals and practices we're supposed to, as far as reporting responsibly.
Like the Iraq War.
Right, exactly.
Where the public was led to believe there were weapons of mass destruction when in fact there weren't.
It's a phenomenal example, and one that we actually talked about in class too. And just despite the advances in digital media, the fundamentals of reporting are the same. Talking to people, checking your facts, using documents and relying on documents as opposed to word of mouth whenever possible. And so that is something that I try to remind myself of every day, and that I hope that other reporters and I pass that on, and that remains a key, central part of our reporting mission years from now, and shows just how important in this uncertain time reporting really is.
So that has been Alan Neuhauser, who says that holding power accountable through rigorous applications of journalistic principles, ensuring that stories are factually accurate and that he remains daily cognizant of the effect that his writing might have on a national conversation, and that he takes great care to be responsible with his journalism, because as much as he hopes to hold power accountable, he also must be accountable to his own high ethical standards, and be always aware of the great power that he does have in writing about his material to his audience. So thank you so much for joining us, Alan.
Thank you for having me.
And that has been episode 72 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.